Okay, we're now going to talk about R2 through T3 of the purchase contract page 12 through 14. Okay, so starting on page 12, we got the R section here. And again, I'm not really going to cover a lot of these, some of the stuff that you can just go ahead and read through, and talk about the standard fillable information. R6, disclosure of real estate licensing status. If you or anyone you know of is involved in this transaction has a active Hawaii real estate license that's related to uh, the either buyer or seller, it needs to be disclosed here. So if you, the buyer agent, are related to your buyer, or maybe you're related to the seller, whatever, it just needs to be disclosed here that there's somebody related to a party to the transaction. So for example, seller is related to seller's agent who holds an active Hawaii real estate license. It's pretty simple. Okay, and then these general provisions are really good to kind of go over because it kind of explains a little bit about the terminology within the contract, like acceptance date. What does that mean? Dates and times. When we talk about expiration of things, this talks about the time frame that things that expire at midnight. Like the J1 is a really important one, that it expires on the like we were saying, the 15th day of the period of time that you have to do your home inspection. You've got 15 days. So the 15th day at midnight, you literally have all the way up until midnight to execute whatever you need to do to either move forward with the transaction or to cancel. But anyway, these things here are really important to kind of go over, like electronic signatures, the legalities of things, that sort of thing. It's good to just kind of go over it later when you have time to read it. This section is where you have the buyer information. So obviously you're going to put the buyer's information here. If you've got more than one buyer, the names go here. There is no fillable line for the signature. That's where you're going to put your DocuSign signature block in. And then of course this is where you would put the date, and then all the agent information and brokerage firm would go here. Sometimes when you're filling out a cooperating broker agreement, that will automatically populate into these sections if you're doing it in zip form, so that's something to think about. And when I'm doing an offer in zip forms, I like to go ahead and date it, because when you do go over to DocuSign to add all of the signature boxes, it can be very time consuming having to click and drag the signature boxes and also click and drag a date stamp. It's pretty cumbersome. So if you date it here, it'll date on every page within the contract, so you don't have to retype it in every time. And then you wouldn't have to click and drag the box for the date in DocuSign. So that's something that you can be doing while you're typing up your contract. And although it says seller's initial and date, you would obviously be doing this on the buyer side if you're representing a buyer. Okay, now moving on to the last page of the contract, which I bet you're so excited that we've got to this section. This is the part where you're going to, obviously, if you're doing a counter offer, you would be checking this box. You're not really going to do any checking of either of these boxes if you're representing a buyer and you're submitting the offer for the first time. If the seller chooses to accept your original offer, the seller will check the T1 box as acceptance of the purchase contract, and when you get it, it will already be checked. If seller is going to be doing a counter offer, the seller will also be checking off the counter offer box, not the T1. So seller will probably be the one doing anything to do with these boxes, so they're usually blank in our samples. The next box down is the T3 box, which talks about the commission. So again, whatever company is representing the seller, you would put the company name here, and typically we'll just put the word as in here because it would then say in the amount of as per the terms of the listing contract. So this would just pretty much refer back to whatever the listing agreement is with the seller's agent. If you were representing a buyer and you had made an agreement with the seller that's not being represented by anybody, you would put here you would probably put in here something to the effect of seller represents self, and then you would put in an amount that the seller is agreeable to paying you. Like maybe you could put in here 3% of the sales price, and that way this is the box that would then become an agreement and a contract between you and the seller if it was a for sale by owner, that type of a thing. So as you read it here, agreement to pay commission to a brokerage firm, seller acknowledges and reaffirms seller's agreement to pay to, you could say Elite Pacific Properties, a commission for the sale of the property in the amount of, and then you would put in the 3% here. That way, if you are working with the seller and it's a for sale by owner and they don't have a listing agreement, you would still be able to contractually obligate them to pay you by way of this box. And that's a good way to determine that. If, let's say, you're working with the seller and they are not agreeable to paying you a commission, but the buyer is agreeable to paying you a commission, the same thing would apply. You would just make reference to that in here and take out the word seller. Okay. Then the next section here is all about the seller information. You would put the seller name in here. If they've got a title, you could put that there too. And then your agent information would go, sorry, not your information, but if you're representing the buyer, that would be the portion up here for your information. And then down here would be the seller agent information. And again, if you're filling out a cooperating broker agreement in zip forms, it should automatically populate the information in here. Sometimes I don't see this very often, but it is important that if you did know it, that you should check it here. But typically a seller would be the one filling this information out right down here, which is seller is a foreign person. This would help escrow with knowing whether or not to withhold the FERPTA HARPTA. Okay, so that concludes the purchase contract. And again, if there's any questions or anything you feel I have not covered, please feel free to call myself or Karen. We'd be happy to answer any of your questions that you have. Okay, and good luck and get some offers going.